Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be our very typical weekend review. I will walk through the top 10, do some deep dives on the new wide releases that came out. And of course, because it is Avengers' second weekend, I will talk a lot about Avengers for the first part of the show. I'll take a peek at what's going on at smaller films, and then I will take a look at what's going to come out over the next couple of weeks. But let's dive right into it. Number one this weekend for May 4th through May 6th was, of course, Avengers in its second weekend. It came in a little bit lower than what people were expecting. What it was doing throughout the week was pretty good. The weekends were a little bit muted because we're not in a summer season, i.e. students and kids are still at school. Colleges are not out yet for the most part. Primary schools, high schools are not out at all. So that's one reason why those weekdays were a little bit sort of depressed. But coming into the weekend, the thought was that, it's really going to take off again. It's going to jump super high Friday and Saturday. That didn't happen. When the Saturday number came in at, 46? The rumor was like, if it could do 50, it could have a really strong weekend, maybe 120, 130 is what people were thinking. That didn't happen, unfortunately. It just did not take off on Saturday. It only came in at about $46 million for that Saturday number. So the current estimate for the weekend of Avengers Infinity War, its second weekend, it is the second best second weekend of all time, $112.4 million. Let's see, a 56% drop for Avengers Infinity War. I mean, it's $112 million is nothing to scoff at for a second weekend. It's the second biggest second weekend of all time. But that 56% drop is kind of high. I think it shouldn't feel that high. We should have expected this. It's the third movie in the series of the Avengers. Usually as you go on in series, the opening weekends get bigger, but the legs get worse. So that should have been an expectation coming into the second weekend. And will, as this film plays out, we don't expect the legs to be all that fantastic. I expect them to be somewhat similar to Ultron or Civil War, maybe higher just because this one's a little bit more well received. I think people are a little bit more ecstatic about it. We basically looking like a 2.5x multiplier overall. Just to get some context before we dive into where Infinity War is going to go, it is the second best second weekend of all time. So the third time I've had to say this. Number one is, of course, Star Wars Force Awakens. December 2015, that came in at $149 million in its second weekend, with a fantastic $36,000 per theater in a second weekend. That was also Christmas holiday time period. So the Force Awakens, what was weird is that people were thinking that because Infinity War somehow blew out the opening weekend record by like 10 million, right? There is this thought process going on that like, it could be Force Awakens domestic. That's not going to happen. I don't think it was ever going to happen, but we didn't really know until this weekend which way it was going to go, and it's not even coming remotely close to beating Force Awakens. That was a movie that opened up during Christmas time. It played insanely well through all of December and January into February. It was one of those holiday films. Jumanji, Greatest Showman. They just have Titanic's another good example. They have super long legs because people go to the movies for like 2 months straight, essentially during that season. That's not the case right now with the summer movie season. They tend to be front loaded on the opening weekends, and that's sort of what's happening with Infinity War. So it came in at 112, just above Black Panther, which came in at $111 million in the second weekend. And now we have a good idea of where this film was going to go. Expectation wise for the weekend was 120 from the industry, and that was on Saturday morning. On Saturday morning they were thinking 120, but Saturday just did not go very well. They're obviously estimating what's happening today, and the estimate is 112 overall. But where does that put us really? How do I translate that? So a 56% drop is not outrageous. It falls in line with stuff like X-Men First Class dropped 56%, Justice League dropped 56%, maybe that's not a good sign. Ant-Man a very well received film with a depressed opening weekend, dropped 56%. But that one did play well consistently for a long time. The original X-Men dropped 56%. Logan dropped 56%. So it's not, totally outside. Oh, Captain America The Winter Soldier dropped 56%. So it falls in line with those movies. And so, it's not going to play like Ant-Man. I'll tell you that right now, because Ant-Man was a smaller film. It played totally different as an origin story. Avengers Infinity War is a movie everybody wanted to see in the opening weekend. And a lot of those people disappeared on the second weekend. Although people are seeing it 2, 3, 4 times, that audience is not big enough to sustain a 3x multiplier. That will not happen. So where is this thing going to end up? It's a fantastic performance. It's a record-breaking second weekend. So it's sort of nothing at all to scoff at. In terms of like where Infinity War is right now compared to the other massive openers, it sits at $450 million domestically. That's about $50 million ahead of Black Panther at this time. It's about $80 million ahead of Star Wars The Last Jedi at this moment. And it's way ahead of Avengers, about $50 million ahead of Jurassic World. It's about 90 million behind The Force Awakens. So it's very squarely in that sort of second slot behind Force Awakens. There's no way it's ever going to be able to catch up to that. The real question, though, is based on this drop, where's this thing going to end up? Now, if you look at second weekend totals as a percentage of the total take of the entire film, for these massive big movies, it's surprising how consistent this percentage is. For the most part, all of the top 5 films basically have the same number. The second weekend is about 16% of its total domestic take. So if we take a look at that, and let's assume the 112 is right, I actually think the 112 is being sort of skewed a little bit higher. I think it's going to come in at maybe like 109, 108. I don't really see it doing all that well today. But let's just assume that the 112 is right. So if 112 is 16% of the total take, you're looking at exactly $700 million total for this one. So that's really, I think, our barometer moving forward with Avengers Infinity War. Kind of like with where we're at with Black Panther right now, is Black Panther is just sort of crawling its way, or sprinting its way, however you want to see it. I think crawling is a little more appropriate. Crawling its way to $700 million, which is, of course, unheard of. Makes no sense for a movie like this. Unbelievable performance. One of the best performances in the history of the box office. And one of the most surprising performances in the history of the box office. So that's on its way to $700 million, hopefully, it seems like. Now, can Avengers Infinity War get there? It seems like it might be able to. If you told me... Here's the funny thing about the box office. If you had this conversation on Wednesday or Thursday, 90% of people would be like, there's no doubt it's hitting 700. Like, there's no doubt. You have a few skeptics that would be like, oh, let's see what the second weekend says. I was saying, I don't know, 700, 750. I mean, it's the opening weekend was so outrageously good. And in the same way that Black Panther was surprising, I think Avengers Infinity War was surprising because we were talking 200, 210, 220. The fact that it's 257, like out of nowhere, was ridiculous. So, everybody got hyped. We all got caught up in this hype, and then second weekend hits, drops 56%, and it's like, oh, okay, it's gonna play like a typical later stage big tentpole MCU film, so a 2.5x multiplier. Now, if we did that, sort of thing, like 2.5x times its 257 opening, 642, so pretty low. So in order to get to 700 million. It's going to need a multiplier of about 2.7, which is a very standard multiplier for a wide release film. Neither good nor bad, just like sort of snap right there in the center. Where do I think Avengers is going to go? I have a feeling that these drops are not like canary in the coal mine, but are very telling. This isn't the type of film like a Black Panther or a Jurassic World or a Force Awakens or an original Avengers that is going to play super, super well for a long period of time. And the reason I say that is this. Unlike Black Panther or, say, the original Avengers, let's just assume these are all good films that people really enjoy. The one big criticism I've seen of Avengers Infinity War, and I mentioned this about the MCU series cinematic universe. I mentioned it multiple times, but I did like a whole, like, at least a half-hour rant maybe 2 years ago, right when I started this podcast, about there is an inherent weakness. And I'm not saying that Avengers is doing poorly. It's doing amazing. It's doing unbelievable. But I'm trying to explain why its multiplier is not going to be very high. So I want to put that into context before I get, like, flamed for this. Avengers Infinity War is the culmination of, 18 other films? 10 years of a cinematic universe that has its own vernacular, its own language, its own memes, its own shorthand. And the issue is that in order to really, really enjoy Avengers Infinity War, and this came up in a lot of the critics' reviews of the film, you have to be in on it, right? You have to have seen most of those 19 films. And so what ends up happening is the pond that you're drawing your audience from gets smaller and smaller and smaller with movies like this, because there's just not a common language that the general audience is going to understand, or a common culture within the film that the audience is going to understand. Now, I'm sure you can watch Avengers Infinity War without have seen all of the other 18 MCU films and enjoy it. The problem is you're not going to get a full enjoyment out of it, or total fulfillment, like a lot of the sort of zealots and fanboys are getting from this experience, which is why these numbers are so high when you look at the scores, right? If you were looking at these scores I'm about to go through, and you asked me what the multiplier was going to be, I'd be like, like 3.5, because these scores sort of match up to a movie that is going to play very well for the long term, but this one's not going to. So Post Track does a running survey of films. So this is sort of the breakdown of the audience. 35% was male over 25. They gave it an 84% positive score. Women over 25 was 25% of the audience. They gave it an 89% positive score. Men under 25 was 21% of the audience. They gave it a 91 positive. Played really well with men under 25. And the lowest positive score was actually women women under 25 who made up 18% of the total audience. They gave it only an 82% score. Overall, 87% positive. Really, really good. And a 68% definite recommend, which is off the charts fantastic. So if you just gave me those very positive numbers and that high definite recommend score, I would guess the multiplier would be very high, relative to other films, like at least a 3. But that's not going to happen here because it is an audience that is cut off from the general audiences. Now, does that make any sense? Can a movie that is cut off from the masses do $257 million opening weekend? I think that it can. I think that everybody who is remotely interested in seeing this movie went to go see it, and there's not a lot of other people or crossover there. There's not a lot of casual people who are going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go sit through 2.5 hours of an MCU Avengers movie if I haven't already seen a lot of these films. Now, it's not dogmatic where it's like, you had to have seen every single one, but I think there is sort of diminishing returns a bit here. Like if I haven't seen, Ultron, or I haven't seen the last couple of like Black Panther stuff, I may not feel like I'm ready for it. I may wait to see it on VOD or just wait until I've seen the rest of those movies. And I think that's why we're seeing this bigger drop than I think people expected. I think we just got a little bit too hyped with that amazing first weekend explosion of hype. And it's just, the second weekend sort of like kind of deflating a bit. I do think it's going to fall short of 700. That's the next real big test. I think it's going to fall under Black Panther domestic-wise. Internationally, I think it'll play fine. Opens up in China here pretty soon. I just get the feeling that the legs just are not going to be there for Infinity War to take it over 700. That's my take on the second weekend of Avengers Infinity War. $112 million, record-breaking second weekend. But that 56% drop kind of, I don't know, it doesn't leave a bad taste in our mouth, but it just going into the weekend, it felt like the drop was going to be like 53, maybe lower, maybe, does 120, 130 million dollars, and just to not make it there. I think the actuals on that one are actually, I think it's going to go down a little bit from the 112, maybe into like the 109 range. But overall, fantastic performance. Avengers Infinity War sitting at $450 million total so far. Nothing to complain about. Okay, number 2 this weekend was Overboard. This was the Anna Faris film, Latino-focused remake here. Laser focused on the Latino audiences, opening the day before Cinco de Mayo. Eugenio Derbez, who's a big Latino star, co-starred with Anna Faris in this. From a newer company, Pantaleon, I think is how you say it. It's a PG-13 rom-com. Did okay, 14.7 million. That's not bad for only being in about 1,600 theaters. Per theater average was $9,000 per theater. That's pretty good for a movie like this, especially from a distributor who is not that wide known. They focus on the Latino audiences, so they did a really good job with that. I saw next to no marketing for this, probably because I'm not part of the demographic. 41% of the audience this weekend for Overboard was Latino. They gave it an 83% positive score. About 59% of the audience was female, which makes sense because it is a rom-com. The production budget on this one was in the low teens, so it looks like it's going to make that up even before it gets to home entertainment. It's the biggest opening for Pantaleon. I have no idea how to say that. I'm just guessing. Cinema score is an A-, so it should have decent legs, maybe a 2.6 to 3x multiplier. Where would that put that at? Let's say it does. My guess is probably like a 2.7, like the normal sort of average multiplier. 2.7 on a 14.7 open, just shy of $40 million. Probably makes it to $40 million. I don't know though. Like, one question I have about whenever a movie is hyper targeted to a specific demographic, I always wonder if the opening weekend is not going to be front loaded. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but like you look at the Tyler Perry movies, which are focused on the African American demographic in the U.S. and Canada, and I wonder if that group of people goes to see it opening weekend, and then there's not a lot of follow-up audience to that. I don't know. We'll keep an eye on this one and see how it does. But not a bad opening at all. 14.7. That's, I think, is very good for a film like this. It's kind of like I would view it as like hyper-focused and targeted movies like this. I view them similar to genre picks. It's just like they're not probably ever going to super break out. But their performance, because they're usually produced for so little money, if they can pull out a $14-15 million opening weekend and cruise to $40 million total domestic, that's a massive win for this movie. So that was number 2 this weekend at the box office. Number 3 was A Quiet Place, The Holdover, from Paramount's Platinum Dune, I believe is the imprint, Michael Bay's imprint. 7.6 million, fantastic 31% drop. Lost about 152 theaters this weekend. Per theater average was 2,227 to be exact. Total take so far for A Quiet Place is $159 million. Remember, its production budget was only $17 million. Massive, huge win for Paramount, for everybody involved in this movie. There's not a lot more I can say about it. Just awesome performance and one of the big stories of the year so far. Number 4 was I Feel Pretty, the Amy Schumer pick from SDX. 4.9 million, dropped about 40%. Lost 200 theaters, still in about 3,200 theaters. Per theater average is not great at 1,500. One thing you'll notice is the drops this weekend were pretty low. I'm not sure why that was. It has something to do with Avengers eating up. Oh, I know why. Because last weekend, Avengers sucked all the air out of the oxygen and took up most of the business at the box office. I don't even know what share Avengers Infinity War was on its opening weekend, but it had to be north of 80%, like 85% or something like that. So that's why the drops are so low, because people didn't see these movies last weekend because it was probably too busy and didn't want to go. I Feel Pretty, though, $1,500 per theater this weekend. Below that Mendoza line, which is $2,000 per theater, that's kind of the point where it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep playing the movie. And so I expect I Feel Pretty next weekend will be its fourth weekend out. I think that's going to drop a lot more than, at least drop a lot more theaters. Overall performance, I feel pretty, is just, it's okay. It's at $38 million so far. Production budget was 32. Deadline said they spent about $30 million to promote it domestically. So you're looking at just total cost domestic, probably like $64-65 million. It's only going to take half of that 38 home. So yeah, it's gonna have a little bit of a trouble, I think, breaking even here. Maybe it breaks even on home video. I think it'll play pretty well on home video. It just seems like one of those movies that if you wanted to see it super bad, you'd go to the theaters. If you just kind of wanted to see it, you would wait until it hit VOD or something like HBO or Netflix. So not a great performance by that film. I don't think it's going to break even at the box office, but I think maybe on home video it turns into the black. Number 5 was Rampage, 4.6 million, a 36% drop. Lost about 350 theaters, still in about 31 theaters on its fourth weekend. Per theater average is not great at about $1,400-$1,500 per theater. Total take so far for Rampage is $85 million. That is on a production budget of $120 million. I go back and forth on Rampage. It feels kind of like a mild flop to me now that I'm looking at it. 4 weeks in, it just didn't hold as well as it should have. It did not open anywhere near where it should have. It definitely feels like a decent sized flop. Domestically, it's definitely a flop. Internationally, it's doing better. It's only 22% domestic so far, 77%, 73% foreign take so far. So it's definitely more focused on the foreign markets. Just here in the States, it did not connect very well at all. But again, might play a lot better on home video. Kind of felt like, or home entertainment, I should say. Is there any video anymore? There's no video cassettes. There's just streaming now. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it does okay on the home entertainment platform. It just, I don't know. Wouldn't you want to go see this in the theater if you were like wanted to see like a crazy action movie? Like, I'm not going to rent it on VOD. Who would? So I don't know. We'll see how it does. But I think box office wide domestically, it is a disappointment. Speaking of disappointments, number 6, Tully. This is the Jason Reitman directed Diablo. Cody wrote the script. Charlize Theron is in it. That's sort of like the trio that's worked together before. I think what was it? Young Adult Fiction, I think was the name of that movie. This did not do well, and it was pretty obvious it was not going to do well. I don't know who greenlighted this film or who thought this was going to be a good idea. It's Focus Features, which I think isn't that Universal? I think it's still owned by Universal. They have a pretty good track record with putting out good art films. This one, they decided to go wide, put it out in 1,300 theaters, opened at $3.1 million. Per theater average opening weekend, $2,300. That's bad. And it's kind of, this is what I'm going to do a little bit deeper dive on because I'm really interested in the people involved in this film. And I think it is an example of how the box office and the movie theater business is changing so much. So just briefly, like Jason Reitman, he got started with a great couple of films. His first trio of films, I think, are all really great. Maybe not like Godfather level fantastic, but definitely up there is well-made, well-produced films. Thank You for Smoking, he put out in March 2006. That did $24.7 million at the box office, but it had a really big cultural footprint. Even bigger than that was December 2007. He put out Juno. Everybody's seen Juno. That was just like that was the movie of that December. That did $143 million domestically. Also, another great film, Up in the Air, which came out in 2009, that did $83 million. That one played so well for so long. I had great legs on that one. So his first 3 films, I think, were all essentially home runs for the most part. The best one probably being Juno. I think I like Up in the Air more than Juno, but I think most people would say Juno is the best out of those 3. And then he had a pretty rough run. 2 years after Up in the Air, he put out Young Adults. I just called it Young Adult Fiction. It's just Young Adult. Again, this is Diablo Cody, Charlize Theron, that trio, and they've reteamed for this new movie, Tully. But young adult did not do great. Opened in December 2011. Only did $16 million at the box office. He arrived about 2 years later in January 2014 with Labor Day. That did even worse. Opened at 5 million, closed out at 13 million. Wow, that's really, you look at that multiplier. They opened it wide, it did 5 million, and it couldn't even hit 3x with that sort of style of film and that sort of depressed opening. That's a bad sign. And then, of course, in October 2014, Jason Reitman put out Men, Women, and Children, which was considered to be an absolute disaster. I've tried to watch it. I like his films. I think he's a good director and a decent writer. This was one of those films, Men, Women, and Children. I couldn't get through it. I just couldn't do it. It opened limited in October 2014. Only did $2,800 per theater on 17 screens, or theaters, I should say. That's horrific. That's got to be one of the worst sort of like limited releases from a high-profile person like this. So he started out super strong with 3 great movies. Then it kind of had 3 duds. And so Tully is his attempt on a brand new studio. He was at Fox Searchlight for Thank You for Smoking and Juno, and then he was at Paramount for Up in the Air, Young Adult, Labor Day, Men, Women, and Children. His last 4 films. This new one, Tully's on Focus, and it just didn't connect at all. The trailers were strange. I can't really figure out who this movie was made for. It has Charlize Theron, and it also has the great Mackenzie Davis from *Halt and Catch Fire*. She was just really fantastic on that show. If you've not seen that show on AMC, just check it out. It's worth watching. It's not like Mad Men level, but it's like Mad Men light. Poor man's Mad Men is what I call it. But Mackenzie Davis is a revelation in that show. And so, going into this, if you put this on paper and you said Jason Reitman is teaming up with Diablo Cody again, Charlize Theron starring, you got Mackenzie Davis in this, you're thinking that, okay, this is an art film, right? Like, that would be my first guess. And for whatever reason, Focus Features thought that they could push this out wide. Deadline said something that, like, they pushed it wide because they wanted to make a lot of money quickly or recoup their funds quickly. Maybe, I don't know. I guess if you tried to push it out in limited release, it may have not gotten to $3 million, I guess is the argument there. It kind of a disaster. Woes the audience. I mean, the post-track scores came in. The critics liked it. 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score. Post-track score, over 87% of the audience was over 25 years old. So it played definitely to the older crowd. They only gave it a 71% positive score. The under 25 audience share was only 13%. So the young people did not show up for this, but they get an 85% positive score. So the young people didn't show up, but they really liked it. The older people did show up and didn't like it that much. Like I said, 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. No cinema score. I think it was too small of an opening. Audience score was 73%, which kind of falls in line to that over 25 audience score. So kind of a little bit of mixed messages. Critics liked it. They gave it a 7.8 out of 10. Audiences were sort of muted on it. I wish I had a cinema score because then you can give you a little bit more context. But it just, no one showed up is what happened. When you have a $2,300 per theater average on an opening weekend on 1,300 theaters, like, that's just like something went wrong here, right? So like, let's do a quick little breakdown, like what went wrong as quickly as we can. Product quality. Was it a product quality issue? Probably not. It's not a masterpiece, clearly, but critics liked it. They gave it a 78 out of 100, essentially. Audiences responded okay to it. They didn't hate it. They didn't think it was the greatest movie ever, but it wasn't like a 50% rating. It was like, 70 to 80, essentially. So it doesn't seem like there's a product quality issue here. And remember, product quality issues, or film quality issues, whatever. I like to say product because it is a product. That's how I want to view it. But, film quality issues can show up opening weekend these days, because Rotten Tomatoes scores come out weeks before a movie is released. But in a lot of cases, they may not affect opening weekend that much. So I don't think there was a big effect here because it was received okay. It's opening weekend. It doesn't seem like that's a major factor in it doing so poorly. Marketing wise, you have marketing quantity and marketing quality. I thought the quality of the marketing was pretty good. I thought the trailers were well done. They pulled you in. I saw a lot of them. I have no idea what the marketing spend was for a film like this, but I think they did an okay job. The only sort of the red flags that I see are maybe it wasn't enough marketing. Maybe it's like a situation that Deadline called out between movies like I Feel Pretty and Blockers, whereas Blockers spent $40-50 million on marketing. It got it into a $20 million opening weekend. I Feel Pretty only spent about 30, couldn't get to that $20 million mark. Maybe something like similar happened here. Maybe they just didn't spend enough money on the marketing. Maybe the quality was there for the marketing, but there just wasn't enough of it. That's a possibility. My gut here says it's a product conception issue. And what I mean by that is there were certain assumptions made when this film was greenlighted. And my guess is that because of the people involved, it was sort of like, hey, these people know what they're doing. Okay, their last movie they did together didn't do okay, but this is a new one. We love the script. I'm sure it's Diablo Cody. Everybody loves their scripts. So the script was probably like super edgy and great. And they got, some good young actors to be in it. And so I think from the product conception angle, they assumed that there would be an audience for this when there wasn't. And it's not that hard to see why there's not an audience. What has Diablo Cody done script-wise recently? And this is pretty harsh, but she's only had Juno. She did Jennifer's Body after that, did terrible. Total flop. Young adult, like we said, flopped. Her last script was Ricky and the Flash, which also flopped. So Diablo Cody doesn't have any cachet. If I am in the industry and like looking through scripts, Diablo Cody, great. She had a movie 12 years ago or 11 years ago that did really well. She hasn't done anything since that has really hit a home run at all. So she doesn't really have the cachet to carry the film. Jason Reitman has had 3 duds in a row, so he can't really carry the film. Charlize Theron obviously had the massive hit with Mad Max a couple years ago. She's also in Atomic Blonde, which was fantastic. She's in Fate and the Furious. So she's super hot right now. So she's as close to an A-list actor as you can, or actress. I guess they want to go by actor, that you can get. So if I'm looking at this, you have a director who can't bring in an audience, who hasn't had a hit in 3 films. You have a screenwriter who hasn't had a hit in like 11 years. All you're really giving me is an A-list actor and some good side actors. Mark Duplass is involved in all. He probably seems like he produced something like this. So if I'm looking at the product conception, it's like, where's the hook? And if you want to move forward with a movie like this, it's an art film. It's not a wide release. So this feels like it was a movie that did not need to be made or released in the format that it was. It feels like it would be great on a Netflix release or an HBO premiere. And I think that's probably slashed the budget by 2/3. And I think that could have been good. Or the alternative is, if you have to release it out in the theaters, put it out in New York, Los Angeles, and just see how it does. It's not, I think the problem here, and a Deadline hinted at this, is that somebody wrote a check for the production and wants to recoup that, which is why they pushed it out wide, which is the exact opposite way you want to release a movie like this. You want to push it to small cities, slowly roll it out, get that word of mouth slowly moving. It moves a lot faster than it did 15, 20 years ago, but it still has to do its thing. Get people in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, get them to say that they love the movie, show it to them, and if they like it, it doesn't seem like it's a bad film. And then that word of mouth travels through social media, and by the time it gets to Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Milwaukee, there's a swell behind it. There's a hype behind it, and it can pull in 4K per theater or 5K per theater once it gets there. But this release, it was a disaster. I don't know what they were thinking. It didn't work, and I don't know how much it's going to make. Like, it's going to be lucky to make $8 million. And I have no idea what it cost or what the marketing costs were. So I guarantee you they spent $8 million on marketing. So that's my small rant on Tully. It just seemed like a bad idea from the start. It didn't really make a lot of sense why anybody would greenlight this with the people involved. Outside of Charlize Theron, there's just nobody with enough clout, industry clout, to really make sense for this to work. So that's Tully. I expect it to disappear pretty much instantaneously next weekend. Okay, let's quickly go through the rest. Number 7 was Black Panther this weekend, 3.1 million, 33% drop, still in 1,600 theaters. Per theater average just dipped below $2,000 per theater in its 12th weekend. Currently sitting at $693 million. My guess is this thing is going to get across the $700 million line. I think Disney is going to force it to stay in theaters until then, even though it's out on DVD in like a week. Number 8 was Truth or Dare from Universal Blumhouse. 1.8 million, 42% drop, lost 500 theaters. Per theater average is an anemic $900 per theater. Per theater take was $38 million. Doesn't matter, because it only costs $3.5 million to make. It's a Blumhouse movie, genre pick. In that case, it's a home run. It'll make even more money in home entertainment. It's already in the black. Number 9 was Super Troopers 2, 1.8 million in its third weekend. Per theater average was terrible at $900 per theater. $25 million take so far. At first, this one seemed like a big win, but the second weekend drop was in the 70s, I think, high 70s even. So I don't know. I think it's going to do okay once it hits VOD and stuff, but it really died here in its second and third weekend. Thought it was well on its way to like something like 30-40 million bucks, but that's not going to happen. Doesn't look like. So Super Troopers is kind of underperforming in its later weekends. Number 10 was a new wide release called Bad Samaritan, from Electric. Who's Electric? Who are these people? Never heard of them before. I believe it's technically self-released. Terrible performance. $1.7 million. $876 per theater on its opening weekend. That might be... I've got to check, but that feels like it could be top 10 all-time worst openings. I'll find it in a second. I feel like the lowest was somewhere around... No, the lowest is like $120, that Proud American movie about the founder or the president of FIFA. Of course I can't find it now and I need to figure it out. Let's see. No, I don't see it. Yeah, I guess it's not that terrible. There's been per theater averages that are like in the 500s and 200s. So, but in any event, it's not great. I was just looking at this list here, and Green Room only did $529 per theater its opening weekend. That's terrible. Okay, so Bad Samaritan was awful. That's mostly it for the weekend. Limited stuff. Not a ton of stuff came out that I want to talk about. Let's look at some per theater average. Disobedience from Bleecker Street. Oh god, yeah, I talked about this one last week. I can't believe I forgot about it. Doing pretty well, doing okay. Expanded from 5 theaters where it did $48K per theater, which was great. Expanded out to 31 theaters. And of course, the per theater average collapsed to $10,000 per theater. Exactly like I said it was going to do. So that's mostly it. Nothing really else to talk about in terms of releases. Okay, let's talk quickly about what's coming out in the next couple of weeks. Breaking In from Universal comes out. It gets its Mother's Day weekend. I think this movie is going to break out. The marketing has been fantastic. It's been incessantly marketed. This one's going to do well. I'm expecting $35-40 million opening. Is that crazy that I'm thinking that? I feel like it's a little bit nuts. It is from Universal, so it's not some small little company. So they definitely put a ton of marketing dollars behind it. They're marketing it along with Mother's Day. It's like almost like Mother Protects Her Children movie. I don't know. I just feel like it's got to hit like 30, 35 or something, maybe 40. That's my take on that one. Life of the Party comes out next weekend as well. Melissa McCarthy. Haven't seen much on this one. Don't think it's going to do very well. Just haven't seen a lot of marketing. Then we get into May 18th, Book Club. I don't know much about this one either. Big cast. Alicia Silverstone, Jane Fonda, Diane Keaton, Andy Garcia, Don Johnson, Candice Bergen, Richard Dreyfuss, Craig T. Nelson. I mean, come on. It's like a massive movie. Or a massive cast. Not going to do anything, though. It's like an old person's movie, probably. Might have good legs, but I don't see it doing that well on its wide release. The real big movie on May 18th is Deadpool 2 from Fox. I have not looked at tracking for this. I have no idea where it's at, but my guess it's over $100 million for tracking, probably in the 120-ish range. Original did 130 something, so I think it's going to be somewhere in there. And I really think it's going to hurt Avengers Infinity War's legs when that opens up. And then Show Dogs is also coming out from a company I don't know very well, Global Road. Will Arnett stars in that. Stanley Tucci and Shaquille O'Neal as well. That's not going to do well. I can just tell you that right now. So the big releases are Deadpool 2, and then the weekend after May 25th, which I guess goes into Memorial Day. Is that Memorial Day? I think it is. Last Monday in May. Solo, a Star Wars story. Donald Glover was just on SNL last night. Really good episode. I don't know. I feel like people are overestimating this movie and underestimating it at the same time. Official tracking, I don't think has come out yet. But there was a lot of pre-order number stuff that was getting thrown out by Disney last week. And it was like, 160, 170. I don't think so. That seems way too high for a movie like this. If it was December and we just didn't have The Last Jedi, and I would say, yeah, like maybe it hits 200, maybe like 160 to $200 million makes sense for Solo. But we just had Last Jedi. How long has Last Jedi been out of the theaters? It kind of left probably in March. So it's been like 2 months. We've had Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War, so 2 massive movies that have come out, so people have spent their money on those. I don't know. I feel like, but at the same time, some people are like, it's going to open under $100 billion. I have no idea where Solo's going to land, but I feel like it's somewhere between like 100, I'm going to say like 120-ish, kind of like what Deadpool 2 is going to do. That's what it feels like to me. I don't think it's going to come anywhere close to $200 million, and I don't really see it opening in like 80 or 90 million bucks. But there's just 2 different sort of narratives going on out there right now. So Solo comes out, and then we are into June, where movies like Action Point, Adrift, Heredity, Ocean's 8, Incredibles 2, Superfly, Tag. It'll be a pretty busy June. But yeah, it's a really weird box office season. This May is just filled with highs and lows. You got your tent poles, and you got basically nothing else. You got Solo, Deadpool 2, and Avengers. And everything else is just getting swept by the side. Anyway, so I will be back next weekend to talk about how Avengers Infinity War does on its 3rd weekend. We'll talk about these new openers that are coming out here for Mother's Day, and sort of just tie up all the analysis that we can do. All right, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.